Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the library. The first thing we do is clean up the mess from last time. Those are scenes. These are scene objects. Here we go. Okay, reading book. Oh, here we go. Over here. Here we go. Grab the book. We gotta put the old one back first, of course. We do that. Now, where did my poster go? I have a poster here somewhere. Oh, here we go. Just pop that up there. We gotta just kind of get the right size version. That was the pamphlet version we had up there a second ago. Okay, here we go. The Island of Dr. Moreau. We're all set and ready to go. I have no idea when ads are. This says ads are like super early, but that is super wrong. No, there we go. No, it says 36 minutes. Okay, we're going to go with that. Let me just situate my butt correctly. All right, here we are. I do have, well, I'll save that for game night. Yes. Okay. The Island of Dr. Moreau. Introduction? Sure. On February the 1st, 1987, the Lady Vane was lost by collision with a derelict when about the latitude 1 degree south and longitude 107 west. On January the 5th, 1988, the following year, that is 11 months and 4 days after, my uncle, Edward Prendick, a private gentleman who certainly went aboard the Lady Vane at Callao and who had been considered drowned, was picked up in latitude 5 degrees 3... Oh, what's the subdegree called? Well, 5 degrees and 3 knots? It's a little tick sound. It's like a prime symbol. It's apostrophe, right? Let's go 5-3 degrees south. We just do it. Minutes, right. 5 degrees and 3 minutes south. That's right. Thank you, Valena. And longitude 101 degrees west, or 101 degrees west, in a small open boat of which the name was illegible, but which is supposed to have belonged to the missing schooner. Oh dear. It's not called Oh dear. Ipecacuanha. Yeah, we're going to move on for that. He gave such a strange account of himself that he was supposed demented. Subsequently, he alleged that his mind was a blank from the moment of his escape from the Lady Vane. His case was discussed among psychologists at the time as a curious instance of the lapse of memory consequent upon physical and mental stress. The following narrative was found among his papers by the undersigned, his nephew and heir, but unaccompanied by any definite request for publication. The only island known to exist in the region in which my uncle was picked up is Noble's Isle, a small volcanic islet and uninhabited. It was visited in 1981 by HMS Scorpion. A party of sailors then landed but found nothing living thereon except certain curious white moths, some hogs and rabbits, and some rather peculiar rats. So that this narrative is without confirmation in its most essential particular. With that understood, there seems no harm in putting this strange story before the public in accordance, as I believe, with my uncle's intentions. There is at least this much in its behalf. My uncle passed out of human knowledge about 5 degrees south and longitude 105 degrees east, and reappeared in the same part of the ocean after a space of 11 months. In some way he must have lived during the interval, and it seems that a schooner called Ipecacuanha, with a drunken captain, John Davies, did start from Africa with a puma and certain other animals aboard in January 1887. That the vessel was well known at several ports in the South Pacific, and that it finally disappeared from those seas with a considerable amount of copra aboard, sailing to its unknown fate from Baina in December 1887, a date that tallies entirely with my uncle's story. Signed, Charles Edward Prendick. Chapter 1. In the Dinghy of the Lady Vane. I do not propose to add anything to what has already been written concerning the loss of the Lady Vane. As everyone knows, she collided with the derelict when 10 days out from Callao. The longboat with 7 of the crew was picked up 18 days after by H.M. gunboat Myrtle, and the story of their terrible privations has become quite as well known as the far more horrible Medusa case. But I have to add to the published story of the Lady Vane another possibly as horrible and far stranger. It has hitherto been supposed that the 4 men who were in the dinghy perished, but this is incorrect. I have the best of evidence for this assertion, as I was one of the 4 men. My chair is being a pain in the butt. But in the first place, I must state that there never were 4 men in the dinghy. I keep wanting to say dingy because of the G. The number was 3. Constans, who was seen by the captain to jump into the rig, luckily for us and unluckily for himself, did not reach us. He came down out of the tangle of ropes under the stays of the smashed bowsprit. Some small rope caught his heel as he let go, and he hung for a moment head downward, and then fell and struck a block or spar floating in the water. We pulled towards him, but he never came up. I say luckily for us he did not reach us, and I might almost say luckily for himself, for we had only a small beaker of water and some sodden ship's biscuits with us. So sudden had been the alarm, so unprepared the ship for any disaster. We thought the people on the launch would be better provisioned, though it seems they were not, and we tried to hail them. They could not have heard us, and the next morning, when the drizzle cleared, which was not until past midday, we could see nothing of them. We could not stand up to look about us because of the pitching of the boat. The 2 other men who had escaped so far with me were a man named Helmar, a passenger like myself, and a seaman whose name I don't know. A short, sturdy man with a stammer. We drifted, famishing, and after our water had come to an end, tormented by an intolerable thirst. For 8 days altogether. Then you would have died from thirst, actually. After the 2nd day, the sea subsided slowly to a glassy calm. It is quite impossible for the ordinary reader to imagine those 8 days. He has not, luckily for himself, or possibly herself, anything in his memory to imagine with. That's right, everybody. We have no imaginations. After the first day, we said little to one another, and lay in our places in the boat and stared at the horizon, or watched, with eyes that grew larger and more haggard every day. The misery and weakness gaining upon our companions. The sun became pitiless. The water ended on the 4th day, and we were already thinking strange things and saying them with our eyes. But it was, I think, the 6th before Helmar gave voice to the thing we had all been thinking. I remember our voices were dry and thin, so that we bent towards one another and spared our words. I stood out against it with all my might, was rather for scuttling the boat and perishing together among the sharks that followed us. But when Helmar said that if his proposal was accepted, we should have drink, the sailor came round to him. I would not draw lots, however, and in the night the sailor whispered to Helmar again and again, and I sat in the bows with my clasp knife in my hand, though I doubt if I had the stuff in me to fight. And in the morning I agreed to Helmar's proposal, and we handed halfpence to find the odd man. The lot fell upon the sailor, but he was the strongest of us, and would not abide by it, and attacked Helmar with his hands. They grappled together and almost stood up. I crawled along the boat to them, intending to help Helmar by grasping the sailor's leg, but the sailor stumbled with the swaying of the boat, and the two fell upon the gunwale and rolled overboard together. They sank like stones. I remember laughing at that, and wondering why I laughed. The laugh caught me suddenly, like a thing from without. I lay across one of the thwarts, for I know not how long, thinking that if I had the strength, I would drink seawater and madden myself to die quickly. And even as I lay there, I saw with no more interest than if it had been a picture, a sail come up towards me over the skyline. My mind must have been wandering, and yet I remember all that happened quite distinctly. I remember how my head swayed with the seas, and the horizon with the sail above it danced up and down. But I also remember as distinctly that I had a persuasion that I was dead, and that I thought what a jest it was that they should come too late by such a little to catch me in my body. For an endless period, as it seemed to me, I lay with my head on the thwart, watching the schooner. She was a little ship, schooner rigged fore and aft, come up out of the sea. She kept tacking to and fro in a widening compass, for she was sailing dead into the wind. It never entered my head to attempt to attract attention, and I do not remember anything distinctly after the sight of her side until I found myself in a little cabin aft. There's a dim half memory of being lifted up to the gangway, and of a big, round countenance covered with freckles and surrounded with red hair staring at me over the bulwarks. I also had a disconnected impression of a dark face with extraordinary eyes close to mine, but that I thought was a nightmare until I met it again. I fancy I recollect some stuff being poured in between my teeth, and that is all. I'm going to mute my phone. Yes, do not disturb. There we go. Okay. We have a yellow warning for snow again. Crazy. Oh, here we go. Chapter 2. The Man Who Was Going Nowhere. The cabin in which I found myself was small and rather untidy. A youngish man with flaxen hair, a bristly straw-colored mustache, and a dropping nether lip was sitting and holding my wrist. I don't know I suppose it's supposed to be drooping, but it's definitely dropping nether lip. I don't know what that is. For a minute, we stared at each other without speaking. He had watery gray eyes, oddly void of expression. Then, just overhead, came a sound like an iron bedstead being knocked about, and the low, angry growling of some large animal. At the same time the man spoke. He repeated his question. "How do you feel now?" I think I said I felt all right. I could not recollect how I had got there. He must have seen the question in my face, for my voice was inaccessible to me. In this context, do you think that they say lower lip or bottom lip? Sure. Like, is he a little slack-jawed kind of, maybe? Right, my voice was inaccessible to me. You were picked up in a boat, starving. The name in the boat was the Lady Vane, and there were spots of blood on the gunwale. At the same time, my eye caught my hand, so thin that it looked like a dirty skin purse full of loose bones, and all the business of the boat came back to me. Have some of this, said he. He gave me a dose of some scarlet stuff, iced. It tasted like blood, made me feel stronger. You were in luck, said he, to get picked up by a ship with a medical man on board. He spoke with a slobbering articulation, with the ghost of a lisp, which I am not going to attempt to replicate, except by accident. What ship is this? I said slowly, hoarse from my long silence. It's a little trader from Arica and Callao. Or Cala? Yeah, Callao. I never asked where she came from in the beginning. Out of the land of born fools, I guess. I'm a passenger myself from Arica. The silly ass who owns her, he's captain too, named Davies. He's lost his certificate or something. You know the kind of man calls the thing the oh dear, I've lost my ability to pretend to pronounce this word. Impakuanaha. Ipikakuanaha. Yeah. Of all silly, infernal names, though when there's much of a sea without any wind, she certainly acts according. Then the noise overhead began again, a snarling growl and the voice of a human being together. Then another voice telling some heaven-forsaken idiot to desist. You were nearly dead, said my interlocutor. It was a very near thing indeed, but I've put some stuff into you now. Notice your arms sore? Injections. You've been insensible for nearly 30 hours. I thought slowly. I was distracted now by the yelping of a number of dogs. Am I eligible for solid food? I asked. Thanks to me, he said. Even now the mutton is boiling. Yes, I said with assurance. I could eat some mutton. But, he said with a momentary hesitation, you know I'm dying to hear of how you came to be alone in that boat. Damn that howling. I thought I detected a certain suspicion in his eyes. He suddenly left the cabin. I heard him in violent controversy with someone who seemed to me to talk gibberish in response to him. The matter sounded as though it ended in blows, but in that I thought my ears were mistaken. Then he shouted at the dogs and returned to the cabin. Well, he said in the doorway, you were just beginning to tell me. I told him my name, Edward Prendick, and how I had taken to natural history as a relief from the dullness of my comfortable independence. Thank goodness we're all rich. All these books about rich people. He seemed interested in this. I've done some science myself. I did my biology at University College, getting out the ovary of the earthworm and the radula of the snail, and all that. Lord, it's 10 years ago, but go on. Tell me about the boat. He was evidently satisfied with the frankness of my story, which I told in concise sentences enough, for I felt horribly weak, and when it was finished, he reverted at once to the topic of natural history and his own biological studies. He began to question me closely about Tottenham Court Road and Gower Street. Is Cap Latiz still flourishing? What a shop that was. He had evidently been a very ordinary medical student and drifted incontinently to the topic of the music halls. He told me some anecdotes. Left it all, he said, 10 years ago. How jolly it all used to be, but I made a young ass of myself, played myself out before I was 21. I dare say it's different now, but I must look up that ass of a cook and see what he's done to your mutton. The growling overhead was renewed, so suddenly and with so much savage anger that it startled me. "What's that?" I called after him, but the door had closed. He came back again with the boiled mutton, and I was so excited by the appetizing smell of it that I forgot the noise of the beast that had troubled me. After a day of alternate sleep and feeding, I was so far recovered as to be able to get from my bunk to the scuttle and see the green seas trying to keep pace with us. I judged the schooner was running before the wind. Montgomery, that was the name of the flaxen-haired man, came in again as I stood there, and I asked him for some clothes. He lent me some duck things of his own, for those I had worn in the boat had been thrown overboard. They were rather loose for me, for he was large and long in his limbs. He told me casually that the captain was 3 parts drunk in his own cabin. As I assumed the clothes, I began asking him some questions about the destination of the ship. He said the ship was bound to Hawaii, but that I had to land him first. But that it had to land him first. Oh, he has to go somewhere before Hawaii. Where? Said I. It's an island where I live. So far as I know, it hasn't got a name. Imagine that. Imagine living in a place that doesn't even have a name. Sounds kind of nice. He stared at me with his nether lip dropping, and looked so willfully stupid of a sudden that it came into my head that he desired to avoid my questions. I had the discretion to ask no more. Chapter 3. The Strange Face. We left the cabin and... Oh, no, actually, if that's correct, let me double check, because things are acting up. Yeah, no, my ad manager is just bonkers. Oh, it's so frustrating. Sorry, I was panicked. I thought we had like 3 minutes to go, but I actually have no idea how long we're going to have to go. So we're just going to have to trust the Gwen in the chatbot. Okay, sorry. When we left the cabin and found a man at the companion obstructing our way, he was standing on the ladder with his back to us. Yeah, it's about 13 minutes. Peering over the combing of the hatchway, he was, I could see. Sorry, there's a full stop there. He was, I could see, a misshapen man, short, broad, and clumsy, with a crooked back and a hairy neck, and a head sunk between his shoulders. He was dressed in dark blue serge. Sergei? He was dressed in dark blue and had peculiarly thick, coarse black hair. I heard the unseen dogs growl furiously, and forthwith he ducked back, coming into contact with the hand I put out to fend him off from himself. He turned with animal swiftness. In some indefinable way, the black face thus flashed upon me shocked me profoundly. It was a singularly deformed one. The facial part projected, forming something dimly suggestive of a muzzle, and the huge half-open mouth showed as big white teeth as I had ever seen in a human mouth. His eyes were bloodshot at the edges, with scarcely a rim of white round the hazel pupils. There was a curious glow of excitement in his face. All of these old books use these kind of examples for evil people. I'm going to guess the book is going to present this character as an evil person. It's a little sick that the authors did this all the damn time. Confound you, said Montgomery. Why the devil don't you get out of the way? I'll wait. The black-faced man started aside without a word. I went up on the companion, staring at him instinctively as I did so. Montgomery stayed at the foot for a moment. You have no business here, you know, he said in a deliberate tone. Your place is forward. The black-faced man cowered. They won't have me forward, he spoke slowly, with a queer, hoarse quality in his voice. Won't have you forward, said Montgomery in a menacing voice, but I tell you to go. He was on the brink of saying something further, then looked up at me suddenly and followed me up the ladder. I had paused halfway through the hatchway, looking back, still astonished beyond measure at the grotesque ugliness of this black-faced creature. I had never beheld such a repulsive and extraordinary face before, and yet, if the contradiction is credible, I experienced at the same time an odd feeling that in some way I had already encountered exactly the features and gestures that now amazed me. Afterwards, it occurred to me that probably I had seen him as I was lifted aboard, and yet that scarcely satisfied my suspicion of a previous acquaintance. Yet, how one could have set eyes on so singular a face and yet have forgotten the precise occasion passed my imagination. Montgomery's movement to follow me released my attention, and I turned and looked about me at the flush deck of the little schooner. I was already half prepared by the sounds I had heard for what I saw. Certainly, I'd never beheld a deck so dirty. It was littered with scraps of carrot, shreds of green stuff, and indescribable filth. Fastened by chains to the mainmast were a number of grisly staghounds who now began leaping and barking at me. And by the mizzen, a huge puma was cramped in a little iron cage far too small even to give it turning room. Farther under the starboard bulwark were some big hutches containing a number of rabbits, and a solitary llama was squeezed in a mere box of a cage forward. The dogs were muzzled by leather straps. The only human being on deck was a gaunt and silent sailor at the wheel. The patched and dirty spankers were tense before the wind, and up aloft the little ship seemed carrying every sail she had. The sky was clear. The sun midway down the western sky, long waves capped by the breeze with froth were running with us. We went past the steersman to the taffrail and saw the water come foaming under the stern and the bubbles go dancing and vanishing in her wake. I turned and surveyed the unsavory length of the ship. "This is an ocean menagerie?" said I. "Looks like it," said Montgomery. "What are these beasts for? Merchandise? Curios? Does the captain think he is going to sell them somewhere in the South Seas?" "Looks like it, doesn't it?" said Montgomery, and turned towards the wake again. Suddenly we heard a yelp, and a volley of furious blasphemy from the companion hatchway, and the deformed man with the black face came up hurriedly. He was immediately followed by a heavy, red-haired man in a white cape. At the sight of the former, the staghounds, who had all tired of barking at me by this time, became furiously excited, howling and leaping against their chains. The black hesitated before them, and this gave the red-haired man time to come up with him and deliver a tremendous blow between the shoulder blades. The poor devil went down like a felled ox, and rolled in the dirt among the furiously excited dogs. It was lucky for him they were muzzled. The red-haired man gave a yawp of exultation and stood staggering, as it seemed to me, in serious danger of either going backwards down the companion hatchway or forwards upon his victim. So soon as the second man had appeared, Montgomery had started forward. "Steady on there," he cried in a tone of remonstrance. A couple of sailors appeared in the forecastle. The black-faced man, howling in a singular voice, rolled about under the feet of the dogs. No one attempted to help him. The brutes did their best to worry him, butting their muzzles at him. There was a quick dance of their lithe, gray-figured bodies over the clumsy, prostrate figure. The sailors forward shouted, as though it was an admirable sport. Montgomery gave an angry exclamation and went striding down the deck, and I followed him. The black-faced man scrambled up and staggered forward, going and leaning over the bulwark by the main shrouds, where he remained, panting and glaring over his shoulder at the dogs. The red-haired man laughed a satisfied laugh. "Look here, Captain," said Montgomery, with his lisp a little accentuated, gripping the elbows of the red-haired man. "This won't do." I stood behind Montgomery. The captain came half round and regarded him with the dull and solemn eyes of a drunken man. "What won't do?" he said, and added, after looking sleepily into Montgomery's face for a minute, "Blasted sawbones." With a sudden movement, he shook his arms free, and after 2 ineffectual attempts, stuck his freckled fists into his side pockets. "That man's a passenger," said Montgomery. "I'd advise you keep your hands off him." "Go to hell," said the captain loudly. He suddenly turned and staggered towards the side. "Do what I like on my own ship," he said. I think Montgomery might have left him there, seeing the brute was drunk, but he only turned a shade paler and followed the captain to the bulwarks. "Look you here, Captain," he said. "That man of mine is not to be ill-treated. He's been hazed ever since he came aboard." For a minute, alcoholic fumes kept the captain speechless. "Blasted sawbones" was all he considered necessary. I could see that Montgomery had one of those slow, pertinacious tempers that will warm day after day to a white heat and never again cool to forgiveness. And I saw, too, that this quarrel had been some time growing. "The man's drunk," said I. "Perhaps officiously you'll do no good." Montgomery gave an ugly twist to his dropping lip. "He's always drunk. Do you think that excuses his assaulting his passengers?" "My ship," began the captain, waving his hand unsteadily towards the cages, "was a clean ship. Now look at it." It was certainly anything but clean. "Crew," continued the captain. "Clean, respectable crew." "You agreed to take the beasts," somebody said. I don't know who said that. "I wish I'd never set eyes on your infernal island. What the devil? Want beasts for on an island like that?" "Oh, what the devil? Want beasts? Yeah, there's a hyphen there. Then that man of yours understood he was a man. He's a lunatic, and he hadn't no business aft. Do you think the whole damn ship belongs to you? Your sailors began to haze the poor devils as soon as he came aboard. That's just what he is. He's a devil, an ugly devil. My men can't stand him. I can't stand him. None of us can't stand him. Nor you either." Montgomery turned away. "You leave that man alone anyhow," he said, nodding his head as he spoke. The captain meant to quarrel now. He raised his voice. "If he comes this end of the ship again, I'll cut his insides out, I tell you. Cut out his blasted insides. Who are you to tell me what I'm to do? I tell you I'm the captain of this ship. Captain and owner. I'm the law here, and I tell you the law and the prophets. I bargained to take a man and his attendant to and from Arica, and bring back some animals. I never bargained to carry a mad devil and a silly sawbones. Well, never mind what he called Montgomery. I saw the latter take a step forward and interposed. "He's drunk," said I. The captain began some abuse even fouler than the last. "Shut up," I said, turning on him sharply, for I had seen danger in Montgomery's white face. With that, I brought the downpour on myself. However, I was glad to avert what was uncommonly near a scuffle. Even at the price of the captain's drunken ill will, I do not think I have ever heard quite so vile language come in a continuous stream from any man's lips before, though I have frequented eccentric company enough. I found some of it hard to endure, though I am a mild-tempered man, but certainly, when I told the captain to shut up, I had forgotten that I was merely a bit of human flotsam, cut off from my resources and with my fare unpaid, a mere casual dependent on the bounty or speculative enterprise of the ship. He reminded me of it with considerable vigor, but at any rate, I prevented a fight. Right, that's between chapters. We'll take an ad break here. Yes, we will. And we'll be back in a few minutes and continue with chapter 4. Great. Welcome back from the ads, everybody. Mouth tracking really does suck if I have my hand in front of my mouth. Let's see. Chapter 4. At the schooner's rail. That night land was sighted after sundown, and the schooner hove to. Montgomery intimated that was his destination. It was too far to see any details. It seemed to me then simply a low-lying patch of dim blue in the uncertain blue-gray sea. An almost vertical streak of smoke went up from it into the sky. The captain was not on deck when it was sighted. After he had vented his wrath on me, he had staggered below, and I understood he went to sleep on the floor of his own cabin. The mate practically assumed the command. He was the gaunt, taciturn individual we had seen at the wheel. Apparently, he was in an evil temper with Montgomery. He took not the slightest notice of either of us. We dined with him in a sulky silence, after a few ineffectual efforts on my part to talk. It struck me, too, that the men regarded my companion and his animals in a singularly unfriendly manner. I found Montgomery very reticent about his purpose with these creatures, and about his destination. And though I was sensible of a growing curiosity as to both, I did not press him. We remained talking on the quarterdeck until the sky was thick with stars, except for an occasional sound in the yellow-lit forecastle and a movement of the animals now and then. The night was still very still. The puma lay crouched together, watching us with shining eyes, a black heap in the corner of its cage. Montgomery produced some cigars. He talked to me of London in a tone of half-painful reminiscence, asking all kinds of questions about changes that had taken place. He spoke like a man who had loved his life there, and had been suddenly and irrevocably cut off from it. I gossiped as well as I could of this and that. All the time, the strangeness of him was shaping itself in my mind, and as I talked, I peered at his odd, pallid face in the dim light of the binnacle lantern behind me. Then I looked out at the darkling sea, where in the dimness of this little island was hidden. This man, it seemed to me, had come out of immensity merely to save my life. Out of immensity. Tomorrow he would drop over the side and vanish again out of my existence. Even had it been under commonplace circumstances, they would have made me a trifle thoughtful, but in the first place was the singularity of an educated man living on this unknown little island, and coupled with that, the extraordinary nature of his luggage. I found myself repeating the captain's question. What did he want with the beasts? Why, too, had he pretended they were not his when I had remarked about them at first? Then, again, in his personal attendant was a bizarre quality which had impressed me profoundly. These circumstances threw a haze of mystery round the man. They laid hold of my imagination and hampered my tongue. Towards midnight, our talk of London died away, and we stood side by side leaning over the bulwarks and staring dreamily over the silent starlit night, each perusing his own thoughts. It was the atmosphere for sentiment, and I began upon my gratitude. If I may say it, said I after a time, you have saved my life. Chance, he answered, just chance. I prefer to make my thanks to an accessible agent. Thank no one. You had the need and I had the knowledge, and I injected and fed you much as I might have collected a specimen. I was bored and wanted something to do. If I had been jaded that day or hadn't liked your face, well, it's a curious question where you would have been now. That damped my mood a little. At any rate, I began. It's a chance, I tell you, he interrupted. As everything in a man's life. Only the asses won't see it. Why am I here now, an outcast from civilization, instead of being a happy man enjoying all the pleasures of London? Simply because 11 years ago I lost my head for 10 minutes on a foggy night. He stopped. Yes, said I. That's all. We relapsed into silence. Presently he laughed. There's something in this starlight that loosens one's tongue. I am an ass, and yet somehow I would like to tell you. Whatever you tell me, you may rely upon my keeping to myself, if that's it. He was on the point of beginning, and then shook his head doubtfully. Don't, said I. It is all the same to me. After all, it is better to keep your secret. There's nothing gained but a little relief if I respect your confidence. If I don't, well... He grunted undecidedly. I felt I had him at a disadvantage, had caught him in the mood of indiscretion, and to tell the truth, I was not curious to learn what might have driven a young medical student out of London. I have an imagination. I shrugged my shoulders and turned away. Over the taffrail leant a silent black figure, watching the stars. It was Montgomery's strange attendant. It looked over its shoulder quickly with my movement, then looked away again. It may seem a little thing to you, perhaps, but it came like a sudden blow to me. The only light near us was a lantern at the wheel. The creature's face was turned for one brief instant out of the dimness of the stern towards this illumination, and I saw that the eyes that glanced at me shone with a pale green light. I did not know then that a reddish luminosity, at least, is not uncommon in human eyes. The thing came to me as stark inhumanity. That black figure, with his eyes of fire, struck down through all my adult thoughts and feelings. What? Your adult thoughts and feelings? And for a moment, the forgotten horrors of my childhood came back to my mind. Then the effect passed as it had come. An uncouth black figure of a man, a figure of no particular import, hung over the taffrail against the starlight, and I found Montgomery was speaking to me. I'm thinking of turning in then, said he. If you've had enough of this. I answered him incongruously. We went below, and he wished me good night at the door of my cabin. That night, I had some very unpleasant dreams. The waning moon rose late. Its light struck a ghostly white beam across my cabin and made an ominous shape on the planking of my bunk. Then the stag hounds woke and began howling and baying, so that I dreamt fitfully and scarcely slept until the approach of dawn. Takes them a while to hit that land, eh? Excuse me a minute. Alright, sorry. Excuse me for my sound. They blow my nose. Chapter 5. The Man Who Had Nowhere to Go. In the early morning, it was the second morning after my recovery, and I believe the fourth after I was picked up. I awoke through an avenue of tumultuous dreams of guns and howling mobs, and became sensible of a hoarse shouting above me. I rubbed my eyes and lay listening to the noise, doubtful for a little while of my whereabouts. Then came a sudden pattering of bare feet, the sound of heavy objects being thrown about, a violent creaking and the rattling of chains. I heard the swish of the water as the ship was suddenly brought round, and a foamy yellow-green wave flew across the little round window and left it streaming. I jumped into my clothes and went on deck. As I came up, the ladder I saw against the flushed sky, for the sun was just rising, the broad back and red hair of the captain, and over his shoulder the puma spinning from a tackle rigged onto the mizzen spanker boom. The poor brute seemed horribly scared, and crouched in the bottom of his little cage. I feel really sorry for that animal. "Overboard with them," bawled the captain. "Overboard with them. We'll have a clean ship soon of the whole biling of them." He stood in my way, so that I had to perforce to tap his shoulder to come on deck. He came round with a start and staggered back a few paces to stare at me. It needed no expert eye to tell that the man was still drunk. "Hello?" said he, stupidly, and then with a light coming into his eyes. "Why, it's Mr. Prendick," said I. "Prendick be damned," said he. "Shut up, that's your name, Mr. Shut Up." He's such a fucking high schooler. It was no good answering the brute, but I certainly did not expect his next move. He held out his hand to the gangway by which Montgomery stood talking to a massive gray-haired man in dirty blue flannels who had apparently just come aboard. "That way, Mr. Blasted Shut Up, that way," roared the captain. Montgomery and his companion turned as he spoke. "What do you mean?" I said. "That way, Mr. Blasted Shut Up, that's what I mean. Overboard, Mr. Shut Up, and sharp. We're cleaning the ship out, cleaning the whole blessed ship out, and overboard you go." I stared at him, dumbfounded. Then it occurred to me that it was exactly the thing I wanted. The lost prospect of a journey as sole passenger with this quarrelsome sot was not one to mourn over. I turned towards Montgomery. "Can't have you," said Montgomery's companion concisely. "You can't have me," said I, aghast. He had the squarest and most resolute face I ever set eyes upon. "Look here," I began, turning to the captain. "Overboard," said the captain. "This ship ain't for beasts and cannibals and worse than beasts any more. Overboard you go, Mr. Shut Up. If they can't have you, you goes overboard, but anyhow you go with your friends. I've done with this blessed island forevermore. Amen. I've had enough of it." "But, Montgomery," I appealed. He distorted his lower lip and nodded his head hopelessly at the gray-haired man beside him to indicate his powerlessness to help me. "I'll see to you presently," said the captain. Then began a curious three-cornered altercation. Alternately I appealed to one and another of the three men, First to the gray-haired man to let me land, and then to the drunken captain to keep me aboard. I even bawled entreaties to the sailors. Montgomery never said a word, only shook his head. "You're going overboard, I tell you," was the captain's refrain. "Law be damned, I'm king here." At last, I must confess, my voice suddenly broke in the middle of a vigorous threat. I felt a gust of hysterical petulance and went aft and stared dismally at nothing. Meanwhile, the sailors progressed rapidly with the task of unshipping the packages and caged animals. A large launch with 2 standing lugs lay under the lee of the schooner, and into this the strange assortment of goods were swung. I did not then see the hands from the island that were receiving the packages, for the hull of the launch was hidden from me by the side of the schooner. Neither Montgomery nor his companion took the slightest notice of me, but busied themselves in assisting and directing the 4 or 5 sailors who were unloading the goods. The captain went forward, inferring rather than assisting. I was alternately despairful and desperate. Once or twice, as I stood waiting there for things to accomplish themselves, I could not resist an impulse to laugh at my miserable quandary. I felt all the wretcheder for the lack of a breakfast. Hunger and a lack of blood corpuscles take all the manhood from a man. I hate it when I'm missing blood corpuscles. Weather? What's wrong with the weather? Hello, Bunny. Oh, you had... thank you for the hydrate. Valana, what do you mean weather? All right, thank you for the headband. I will sit upright, thank you. Did something happen in the weather? The weather seems to be pretty good on this ship here. It's the attitudes that suck. Oh, am I sniffling a lot? Damn it. I took nasal spray. Try and fix that. Yeah. I apologize if I have overly sniffled in people's ears. Before, oh. Yeah, any time, I guess. I perceived pretty clearly that I had not the stamina either to resist what the captain chose to do to expel me, or to force myself upon Montgomery and his companion. So I waited passively upon fate, and the work of transferring Montgomery's possessions to the launch went on as if I did not exist. Presently, that work was finished, and then came a struggle. I was hauled, resisting weakly enough, to the gangway. Even then I noticed the oddness of the brown faces of the men who were with Montgomery in the launch, but the launch was now fully laden, and was shoved off hastily. A broadening gap of green water appeared under me, and I pushed back with all my strength to avoid falling headlong. The hands in the launch shouted derisively, and I heard Montgomery curse at them, and then the captain, the mate, and one of the seamen helping him ran me aft towards the stern. The dinghy of the Lady Vane had been towing behind. It was half full of water and had no oars, and was quite unvictualated, whatever that means. Victualated. I refused to go aboard her, and flung myself full length on the deck. In the end, they swung me into her by a rope, for they had no stern ladder, and they cut me adrift. I drifted slowly from the schooner. In a kind of stupor, I watched all hands take to the rigging, and slowly but surely she came round to the wind. The sails fluttered, and then bellied out as the wind came into them. I stared at her weather-beaten side, heeling steeply towards me, and then she passed out of my range of view. I did not turn my head to follow her. At first I could scarcely believe what had happened. I crouched in the bottom of the dinghy, stunned and staring blankly at the vacant, oily sea. Then I realized that I was in that little hell of mine again. now half swamped, and looking back over the gunwale, I saw the schooner standing away from me, and with the red-haired captain mocking at me over the taffrail. And turning towards the island, saw the launch growing smaller as she approached the beach. Abruptly, the cruelty of this desertion became clear to me. I had no means of reaching the land unless I should chance to drift there. I was still weak, you must remember, from my exposure in the boat. I was empty and very faint, or I should have had more heart. But as it was, I suddenly began to sob and weep, as I had never done since I was a little child. The tears ran down my face. In a passion of despair, I struck with my fists at the water in the bottom of the boat, and kicked savagely at the gunwale. I prayed aloud for God to let me die. Chapter 6. The Evil-Looking Boatmen. But the islanders, seeing that I was really adrift, took pity on me. I drifted very slowly to the eastward, approaching the island slantingly, and presently I saw, with hysterical relief, the launch come round and return towards me. She was heavily laden, and I could make out as she drew near Montgomery's white-haired, broad-shouldered companion sitting cramped up with the dogs and several packing cases in the stern sheets. This individual stared fixedly at me without moving or speaking. The black-faced cripple was glaring at me as fixedly in the bows near the Puma. There were 3 other men besides, 3 strange, brutish-looking fellows at whom the staghounds were snarling savagely. Montgomery, who was steering, brought the boat by me, and rising, caught and fastened my painter to the tiller to tow me, for there was no room aboard. I had recovered from my hysterical phase by this time, and answered his hail as he approached, bravely enough. I told him the dinghy was nearly swamped, and he reached me in a pigeon. I was jerked back as the rope tightened between the boats. For some time I was busy bailing. It was not until I had the water under, for the water in the dinghy had been shipped, the boat was perfectly sound, that I had leisure. Sorry, some of that was in brackets, so there's a lot of grammar going on there. That I had the leisure to look at the people in the launch again. The white-haired man, I found, was still regarding me steadfastly, but with an expression, as I now fancied, of some perplexity. When my eyes met his, he looked down at the staghound that sat between his knees. He was a powerfully built man, as I have said, with a fine forehead and rather heavy features, but his eyes had that odd drooping of the skin above the lids which often comes with advancing years, and the fall of his heavy mouth at the corners gave him an expression of pugnacious resolution. He talked to Montgomery in a tone too low for me to hear. From him my eyes traveled to his 3 men. A strange crew they were. I saw only their faces, yet there was something in their faces, I knew not what, that gave me a queer spasm of disgust. I looked steadily at them, and the impression did not pass, though I failed to see what had occasioned it. They seemed to me then to be brown men, but their limbs were oddly swathed in some thin, dirty, white stuff down even to the fingers and feet. I've never seen men so wrapped up before, and women so only in the East. They wore turbans too, and thereunder peered out their elfin faces at me, faces with protruding lower jaws and bright eyes. They had lank black hair and almost like horsehair, and seemed, as they sat, to exceed in stature any race of man I have seen. The white-haired man, who I knew was a good 6 feet in height, sat a head below any one of the 3. I found afterwards that really none were taller than myself, but their bodies were abnormally long, and the thigh part of the leg short and curiously twisted. At any rate, they were an amazingly ugly gang, and over the heads of them, under the forward lug, peered the black face of the man whose eyes were luminous in the dark. As I stared at them, they met my gaze, and then first one and then another turned away from my direct stare and looked at me in an odd, furtive manner. It occurred to me that I was perhaps annoying them, and I turned my attention to the island where we were approaching. It was low and covered with thick vegetation, chiefly a kind of palm that was new to me. From one point, a thin white thread of vapor rose slantingly to an immense height and then frayed out like a down feather. We were now within the embrace of a broad bay, flanked on either hand by a low promontory. The beach was of dull gray sand and sloped steeply up to a ridge perhaps 60 or 70 feet above the sea level, and irregularly set with trees and undergrowth. Halfway up was a square enclosure of some grayish stone, which I found subsequently was built partly of coral and partly of pumiceous. Oh, no. Pumicius? Of lava. Lava rock. A rock of lava. Two thatched roofs apparently, peeped from within this enclosure. A man stood awaiting us at the water's edge. I fancied, while we were still far off, that I saw some other and very grotesque-looking creatures scuttle into the bushes upon the slope, but I saw nothing of these as we drew nearer. This man was of a moderate size, and with a black, negroid face. Lovely. He had a large, almost lipless mouth, extraordinarily lank arms, long, thin feet, and bow legs, and stood with his heavy face thrust forward, staring at us. He was dressed like Montgomery, and his white-haired companion in jacket and trousers of blue serge. As we came still nearer, this individual began to run to and fro on the beach, making the most grotesque movements. At a word of command from Montgomery, the four men in the launch sprang up, and with singularly awkward gestures struck the lugs. Montgomery steered us round and into a narrow little dock excavating in the beach. Then the man on the beach hastened towards us. This dock, as I call it, was really a mere ditch just long enough at this phase of the tide to take the longboat. A pumice? Pumice, where was that word? So it's Pumiceous. That's not pumice. It's well, whatever. It's lava rock. There you go. I fixed it. I fixed the problem with the word thing. It's no longer a problem because I fixed it. It's good, yeah. I heard the bows ground in the sand, or the bow ground in the sand, staved the dinghy off the rudder of the big boat with my pigeon. It's piggin. It's pigeon, only one word. And freeing the painter landed. All these words I assume are from sailing nomenclature. I don't know what a pigeon is. I don't know what a painter is. I mean, I know what a painter is, but I doubt it has anything to do with a boat. Unless they're painting the damn boat. The three muffled men with the clumsiest movements scrambled out upon the sand and forthwith set to landing the cargo. Assisted by the man on the beach, I was struck especially by the curious movements of the legs of the three swathed and bandaged boatmen. Not stiff they were, but distorted in some odd way, almost as if they were joined in the wrong place. The dogs were still snarling and strained at their chains after these men, as the white-haired man landed with them. The three big fellows spoke to one another in odd guttural tones, and the man who had waited for us on the beach began chattering to them excitedly, a foreign language, as I fancied, as they laid hands on some bales piled near the stern. Somewhere I had heard such a voice before and could not think where. The white-haired man stood, holding a tumult of 6 dogs, and bawling orders over their din. Montgomery, having unshipped the rudder, landed likewise, and all set to work at unloading. I was too faint, what with my long fast and the sun beating down on my bare head, to offer assistance. Presently, the white-haired man seemed to recollect my presence and came up to me. "You look," said he, "as though you scarcely breakfasted." His little eyes were a brilliant black under his heavy brows. "I must apologize for that. Now you are our guest, we must make you comfortable. Though you are uninvited, you know." He looked keenly into my face. "Montgomery says you are an educated man, Mr. Prendick. Says you know something of science. May I ask what that signifies?" I told him I had spent some years at the Royal College of Science and had done some researches in biology under Huxley. He raised his eyebrows slightly at that. "That alters the case a little, Mr. Prendick," he said, with a trifle more respect in his manner. "As it happens, we are biologists here. This is a biological station of a sort." His eyes rested on the men in white who were busily hauling the puma on rollers towards the walled yard. "I and Montgomery, at least," he added then. When you will be able to get away, I can't say. We're off the track to anywhere. We see a ship once in a 12-month or so." He left me abruptly and went up the beach past this group. I think I entered the enclosure. entered the enclosure. The other 2 men were with Montgomery, erecting a pile of smaller packages on a low-wheeled truck. The llama was still on the launch with the rabbit hutches, and the staghounds were still lashed to the thwarts, the pile of things completed. All 3 men laid hold of the truck and began shoving the ton-weight or so upon it after the puma. Presently Montgomery left them, and coming back to me held out his hand. "I'm glad," said he. "For my own part, that captain was a silly ass. He'd have made things lively for you." "It was you," said I, "that saved me again." "That depends. You'll find this island an infernally rum place, I promise you. I'd watch my goings carefully if I were you. He hesitated, and seemed to alter his mind about what was on his lips. "I wish you'd help me with these rabbits," he said. His procedure with the rabbits was singular. I waded in with him and helped him lug one of the hutches ashore. No sooner was that done than he opened the door of it and, tilting the thing on one end, turned its living contents out on the ground. They fell in a struggling heap, one on the top of the other. He clapped his hands, and forthwith they went off with that hopping run of theirs, 15 or 20 of them, I should think, up the beach. Increase and multiply, my friends," said Montgomery. "Replenish the island. Hitherto we've had a certain lack of meat here." Introducing an invasive species for the purposes of eating meat. I'm sure nothing bad could possibly happen there. As I watched them disappearing, the white-haired man returned with a brandy flask and some biscuits. "Something to go on with, Prendick," said he, in a far more familiar tone than before. I made no ado, but set to work on the biscuits at once, while the white-haired man helped Montgomery to release about a score more of the rabbits. 3 big hutches, however, went up to the house with the puma. The brandy I did not touch, for I have been an abstainer from my birth, like the only person in that era. Chapter 7, The Locked Door. The reader will perhaps understand that at first everything was so strange about me, and my position was the outcome of such unexpected adventures that I had no discernment of the relative strangeness of this or of that thing. I followed the llama up the beach and was overtaken by Montgomery, who asked me not to enter the stone enclosure. I noticed then that the puma in its cage and the pile of packages had been placed outside the entrance to this quadrangle. I turned and saw that the launch had now been unloaded, run out again, and was being beached. And the white-haired man was walking towards us. He addressed Montgomery. And now comes the problem of this uninvited guest. What are we to do with him? He knows something of science, said Montgomery. I'm itching to get to work again with this new stuff, said the white-haired man, nodding towards the enclosure. His eyes grew brighter. I dare say you are, said Montgomery, in anything but a cordial tone. We can't send him over there, and we can't spare the time to build him a new shanty, and we certainly can't take him into our confidence just yet. I'm in your hands, said I. I had no idea what he meant by over there. I've been thinking of the same things, Montgomery answered. There's my room with the outer door. That's it, said the elder man, promptly looking at Montgomery, and all three of us went towards the enclosure. I'm sorry to make it a mystery, Mr. Prendick, but you'll remember you're uninvited. Our little establishment here contains a secret or so. It is a kind of Bluebeard's chamber, in fact. Nothing very dreadful, really, to a sane man, but just now, as we don't know you. Decidedly, said I should be a fool to take offense at any want of confidence. He twisted his heavy mouth into a faint smile. He was one of those saturnine people who smile with the corners of their mouths down, and bowed his acknowledgment of my complaisance. Complaisance. They have like an odd spelling there. The main entrance to the enclosure was passed. It was a heavy wooden gate, framed in iron and locked, with the cargo of the launch piled outside it, and at the corner we came to a small doorway I had not previously observed. The white-haired man produced a bundle of keys from the pocket of his greasy blue jacket, opened the door, and entered. His keys and the elaborate locking up of the place, even while it was still under his eye, struck me as peculiar. I followed him, and found myself in a small apartment, plainly but not uncomfortably furnished, with its inner door, which was slightly ajar, opening into a paved courtyard. This inner door Montgomery at once closed. A hammock was slung across the dark corner of the room, and a small unglazed window, defended by an iron bar, looked outwards to sea. This, the white-haired man told me, was to be my apartment, and the inner door, which, for fear of accidents, he said, would lock on the other side. It was my limit inward. He called my attention to a convenient deck chair before the window and to an array of old books. Chiefly, I found surgical works and editions of the Latin and Greek classics, languages I cannot read with any comfort. On a shelf near the hammock, he left the room by the outer door, as if to avoid opening the inner one again. We usually have our meals in here, said Montgomery, and then, as if in doubt, went out after the other Moreau, I heard him call, and for the moment I do not think I noticed. Then, as I handled the books on the shelf, it came up in consciousness. Where had I heard the name Moreau before? I sat down before the window, took out the biscuits that still remained to me, and ate them with an excellent appetite. Moreau. Through the window, I saw one of those unaccountable men in white lugging a packing case along the beach. Presently the window frame hid him. Then I heard a key inserted and turned in the lock behind me. After a little while, I heard through the locked door the noise of the staghounds that had now been brought up from the beach. They were not barking, but sniffing and growling in a curious fashion. I could hear the rapid patter of their feet and Montgomery's voice soothing them. I was very much impressed by the elaborate secrecy of these two men regarding the contents of the place, and for some time I was thinking of that and of the unaccountable familiarity of the name of Moreau. But so odd is the human memory that I could not then recall that well-known name in its proper connection. From that my thoughts went to the indefinable queerness of the deformed man on the beach. I never saw such a gait, such odd motions as he pulled at the box. I recalled that none of these men had spoken to me, though most of them I had found looking at me at one time or another in a peculiarly furtive manner, quite unlike the frank stare of your unsophisticated savage. I hate it when the unsophisticated savages stare at you, frankly. Indeed, they had all seemed remarkably taciturn, and when they did speak, endowed with very uncanny voices. What was wrong with them? Sorry. Indeed, they had all seemed remarkably taciturn, and when they did speak, endowed with very... No. Their commas are not doing what I want them to do. They had all seemed remarkably taciturn, and when they did speak, endowed with very uncanny voices. Yeah, that's a weird sentence. What was wrong with them? Then I recalled the eyes of Montgomery's ungainly attendant. Just as I was thinking of him, he came in. He was now dressed in white and carried a little tray with some coffee and boiled vegetables thereon. I could hardly repress a shuddering recoil as he came, bending amiably and placed the tray before me on the table. Then astonishment paralyzed me. Under his stringy black locks, I saw his ear. It jumped upon me suddenly, close to my face. The man had pointed ears, covered with a fine, brown fur. "Your breakfast, sire?" he said. Or sire. Yeah, it's S-A-I-R. I want to say that's sire. "Your breakfast, sire," he said. I stared at his face without attempting to answer him. He turned and went towards the door, regarding me oddly over his shoulder. I followed him out with my eyes, and as I did so, by some odd trick of unconscious cerebration, there came surging into my head the phrase, "The Moreau Hollows." Was it? The Moreau. Ah, it sent my memory back 10 years. The Moreau horrors. The phrase drifted loose in my mind for a moment, and then I saw it in red lettering on a little bluff-colored pamphlet, to read which made one shiver and creep. Then I remembered distinctly all about it. That long-forgotten pamphlet came back with a startling vividness to my mind. I had been a mere lad then, and Moreau was, I suppose, about 50. A prominent and masterful physiologist, well known in scientific circles for his extraordinary imagination and his brutal directness in discussion. Was this the same Moreau? He had published some very astonishing facts in connection with the transfusion of blood, and in addition was known to be doing valuable work on morbid growths. Then suddenly his career was closed. He had to leave England. A journalist obtained access to his laboratory, and in the capacity of a laboratory assistant, with the deliberate intention of making sensational exposures, and by the help of a shocking accident, if it was an accident, his gruesome pamphlet became notorious. On the day of its publication, a wretched dog, flayed and otherwise mutilated, escaped from Moreau's house. It was in the silly season, and a prominent editor, a cousin of the temporary laboratory assistant, appealed to the conscience of the nation. It was not the first time that conscience had turned against the methods of research. The doctor was simply howled out of the country. It may be that he deserved to be, but I still think that the tepid support of his fellow investigators and his desertion by the great body of scientific workers was a shameful thing. Yet some of his experiments, by the journalist's account, were wantonly cruel. He might perhaps have purchased his social peace by abandoning his investigations, but he apparently preferred the latter, as most men would who have once fallen on the overmastering spell of research. He was unmarried, and had indeed nothing but his own interest to consider. I felt convinced that this must be the same man. Everything pointed to it. It dawned upon me to what end the puma and the other animals which had now been brought with other luggage into the enclosure behind the house were destined, and a curious faint odor, the haliotus of something familiar, an odor that had been in the background of my consciousness hitherto, suddenly came forward into the forefront of my thoughts. It was the antiseptic odor of the dissecting room. I heard the puma growling through the wall, and one of the dogs yelped as though it had been struck. Yet surely, and especially to another scientific man, there was nothing so horrible in vivisection as to account for this secrecy, and by some odd leap in my thoughts, the pointed ears and luminous eyes of Montgomery's attendant came back again before me with the sharpest definition. I stared before me out at the green sea, frothing under a freshening breeze, and that these and other strange memories of the last few days chased one another through my mind. What could it all mean? A locked enclosure on a lonely island, a notorious vivisector, and these crippled and distorted men. Chapter 8. The Crying of the Puma. Montgomery interrupted my tangle of mystification and suspicion about 1 o'clock, and his grotesque attendant followed him with a tray bearing bread, some herbs, and other eatables, a flask of whiskey, a jug of water, and 3 glasses and knives. I glanced askance at this strange creature, and found him watching me with his queer, restless eyes. Montgomery said he would lunch with me, but that Moreau was too preoccupied with some work to come. Moreau, said I. I know that name. The devil you do, said he. What an ass I was to mention it to you. I might have thought. Anyhow, it will give you an inkling of our mysteries. Whiskey? No thanks. I am an abstainer. I wish I had been. But it's no use locking the door after the steed is stolen. It was that infernal stuff which led to my coming here, that and a foggy night. I thought myself in luck at the time when Moreau offered to get me off. It's queer. Montgomery, said I, suddenly at the outer door as the outer door closed. Why has your man pointed ears? Damn, he said, over his first mouthful of food. He stared at me for a moment, and then repeated, Pointed ears? Little points to them, said I, as calmly as possible, with a catch in my breath, and a fine black fur at the edges. He helped himself to whiskey and water with great deliberation. I was under the impression that his hair covered his ears. I saw them as he stooped by me to put that coffee you sent to me on the table, and his eyes shine in the dark. By this time Montgomery had recovered from the surprise of my question. I always thought, he said deliberately, with a certain accentuation of his flavoring of lisp, that there was something the matter with his ears, from the way he covered them. What were they like? We're going to play innocent, I see. I was persuaded from his manner that this ignorance was a pretense. Still, I could hardly tell the man that I thought him a liar. Pointed, I said, rather small and furry, distinctly furry. But the whole man is one of the strangest beings I ever set eyes on. A sharp, hoarse cry of animal pain came from the enclosure behind us. Its depth and volume testified to the puma. I saw Montgomery wince. "Yes," he said. "Where did you pick up the creature?" "San Francisco. He's an ugly brute, I admit. Half-witted, you know. Can't remember where he came from, but I'm used to him, you know. We both are. How does he strike you?" "He's unnatural," I said. "There's something about him. I don't think me fanciful, but it gives me a nasty little sensation, a tightening of my muscles when he comes near me. It's a touch of the diabolical, in fact." Montgomery had stopped eating while I told him this. "Rum," he said. "I can't see it." He resumed his meal. "I had no idea of it," he said, and masticated. "The crew of the schooner must have felt it the same, made a dead set at the poor devil. You saw the captain?" Suddenly, the puma howled again, this time more painfully. Montgomery swore under his breath. I had half a mind to attack him about the men on the beach. Then the poor brute within gave vent to a series of short, sharp cries. "Your men on the beach," said I. "What race are they?" "Excellent fellows, aren't they?" said he, absent-mindedly, knitting his brows as the animal yelled out sharply. I said no more. There was another outcry worse than the former. He looked at me with his dull gray eyes and then took some more whiskey. He tried to draw me into a discussion about alcohol, professing to have saved my life with it. He seemed anxious to lay stress on the fact that I owed my life to him. I answered him distractedly. Presently, our meal came to an end. The misshapen monster with the pointed ears cleared the remains away, and Montgomery left me alone in the room again. All the time he had been in a state of ill-concealed irritation at the noise of the vivisected puma. He had spoken of his odd want of nerve and left me to the obvious application. I found myself that the cries were singularly irritating. They grew in depth and in intensity as the afternoon wore on. They were painful at first, but their constant resurgence at last altogether upset my balance. I flung aside a crib of Horace I had been reading and began to clench my fists, to bite my lips, and to pace the room. Presently, I got to stopping my ears with my fingers. The emotional appeal of those yells. Yeah, I see that. We have ads. Yeah, we have like 2 paragraphs. Okay, we only have like 66. Are we going to stop for ads? I do stop for ads. We're going to run 3 minutes of them. We'll be back and we'll continue at that point. And we're back. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, the last couple of paragraphs. Our character is presently stoppering his ears with his fingers. The emotional appeal of those yells grew upon me steadily, grew at last to such an exquisite expression of suffering that I could stand in that confined room no longer. I stepped out of the door into the slumberous heat of the late afternoon, and walking past the main entrance, locked again, I noticed, turned the corner of the wall. The crying sounded even louder at the doors. It was as if all the pain in the world had found a voice, yet I had known such pain was in the next room. And it had been dumb. I believe. Got commas in weird places. It was as if all the pain in the world had found a voice. Yet had I known such pain was in the next room, and had it been dumb, I believe, I have thought since, I could have stood it well enough. It is when suffering finds a voice and sets our nerves quivering that this pity comes troubling us. But in spite of the brilliant sunlight and the green fans of the trees waving in the soothing sea breeze, the world was a confusion, blurred with drifting black and red phantasms, until I was out of earshot of the house in the checkered wall. That poor creature. That whole trip, you imagine that poor puma ripped away from its home, carried in a tiny cage on an unsteady boat with yelling humans, hoisted into the air to land upon another boat, dragged onto land into a tiny room, only to then be dissected alive. What a terrible way for a creature to go. Chapter 9, The Thing in the Forest. I strode through the undergrowth that clothed the ridge behind the house, scarcely heeding whither I went, passed on through the shadow of a thick cluster of straight-stemmed trees beyond it, and so presently found myself some way on the other side of the ridge, and descending towards a streamlet that ran through a narrow valley. I paused and listened. The distance I had come, or the intervening masses of thicket, deadened any sound that might be coming from the enclosure. The air was still. Then, with a rustle, a rabbit emerged and went scampering up the slope before me. I hesitated, and sat down in the edge of the shade. The place was a pleasant one. The rivulet was hidden by the luxuriant vegetation of the banks, save at one point, where I caught a triangular patch of its glittering water. On the farther side, I saw through a bluish haze a tangle of trees and creepers, and above these again the luminous blue of the sky. Here and there, a splash of white or crimson marked the blooming of some trailing epiphyte. Epiphyte? Interesting. I let my eyes wander over this scene for a while, and then began to turn over in my mind again the strange peculiarities of Montgomery's man. But it was too hot to think elaborately, and presently I fell into a tranquil state midway between dozing and waking. From this I was aroused, after I know not how long, by a rustling amidst the greenery on the other side of the stream. For a moment I could see nothing but the waving summits of the ferns and reeds. Then suddenly, upon the bank of the stream appeared something. At first I could not distinguish what it was. It bowed its round head to the water and began to drink. Then I saw it was a man, going on all fours like a beast. He was clothed in bluish cloth, and was of a copper-colored hue with black hair. It seemed that grotesque ugliness was an invariable character of these islanders. I could hear the suck of the water at his lips as he drank. I leaned forward to see him better, and a piece of lava detached by my hand went pattering down the slope. He looked up guiltily, and his eyes met mine. Forthwith, he scrambled to his feet and stood wiping his clumsy hand across his mouth and regarding me. His legs were scarcely half the length of his body, so staring one another out of countenance, we remained for perhaps the space of a minute. Then, stopping to look back once or twice, he slunk off among the bushes to the right of me, and I heard the swish of the fronds grow faint in the distance and die away. Long after he had disappeared, I remained sitting up, staring in the direction of his retreat. My drowsy tranquility had gone. I was startled by a noise behind me, and turned suddenly suddenly saw the flapping white tail of a rabbit vanishing up the slope. I jumped to my feet. The apparition of this grotesque, half-bestial creature had suddenly populated the stillness of the afternoon for me. I looked around me rather nervously and regretted that I was unarmed. Then I thought the man I had just seen had been clothed in bluish cloth, and had not been naked as a savage would have been. I tried to persuade myself from the fact that he was after all probably a peaceful character, that the dull ferocity of his countenance belied him. Yet I was greatly disturbed at the apparition. I walked to the left along the slope, turning my head about and peering this way and that among the straight stems of the trees. Why should a man go on all fours and drink with his lips? Presently I heard an animal wailing again, and taking it to be the puma, I turned about and walked in a direction diametrically opposite to the sound. This led me down the stream, across which I stepped and pushed my way up through the undergrowth beyond. Well, howdy, partner. Hello there, friend. Been lurking but wanted to say I love you. Oh, you'd like my voice. Thank you very much. That's very kind. I'm glad you like it. Right, led him down the stream, across which I stepped and pushed my way up through the undergrowth beyond. I was startled by a great patch of vivid scarlet on the ground, and going up to it, found it to be a peculiar fungus, branched and corrugated like a foliaceous lichen, but every third word is like 14 characters long, but deliquescing into slime at the touch. And then in the shadow of some luxuriant ferns, I came upon an unpleasant thing. The dead body of a rabbit covered with shining flies, but still warm and with the head torn off. I stopped, aghast at the sight of the scattered blood. Here, at least, was one visitor to the island disposed of. There were no traces of other violence about it. It looked as though it had been suddenly snatched up and killed. And as I stared at the little furry body, came the difficulty of how the thing had been done. The vague dread that had been in my mind since I had seen the inhuman face of the man at the stream grew distincter as I stood there. I began to realize that the hardihood of my expedition among these unknown people. I've never ever even thought of that word before. The thicket about me became altered to my imagination. Every shadow became something more than a shadow, became an ambush. Every rustle became a threat. Invisible things seemed watching me. I resolved to go back to the enclosure on the beach. I suddenly turned away and thrust myself violently, possibly even frantically, through the bushes, anxious to get a clear space about me again. I stopped, just in time to prevent myself emerging upon an open space. It was a kind of glade in the forest, made by a fall. Seedlings were already starting to struggle up for the vacant space, and beyond the dense growth of stems and twining vines and splashes of fungus and flowers closed in again. Before me, squatting together upon the fungoid ruins of a huge fallen tree, and still unaware of my approach, were three grotesque human figures. Who must be deaf then, because you've been scrambling through the foliage. One was evidently a female. The other two were men. They were naked, save for swathings of scarlet cloth about the middle, and their skins were of a dull pinkish drab color, such as I had seen in no savages before. They had fat, heavy, chinless faces, retreating foreheads, and a scant, bristly hair upon their actual heads. I never saw such bestial-looking creatures. They were talking, or at least one of the men was talking to the other two, and all three had been too closely interested to heed the rustling of my approach. They swayed their heads and shoulders from side to side. The speaker's words came thick and sloppy, and though I could hear them distinctly, I could not distinguish what he said. He seemed to me to be reciting some complicated gibberish. Presently his articulation became shriller, and spreading his hands he rose to his feet. At that the others began to gibber in unison, also rising to their feet, spreading their hands and swaying their bodies in rhythm with their chant. I noticed then the abnormal shortness of their legs and their lank, clumsy feet. All three began slowly to circle around, rising and stamping their feet and waving their arms. A kind of tune crept into their rhythmic recitation, and a refrain, alula, or balula, it sounded like. Their eyes began to sparkle and their ugly faces to brighten, with an expression of strange pleasure. Saliva dripped from their lipless mouths. Lipless mouths must be pretty scary to look at. Like, that's gotta be nightmare fuel. Suddenly, as I watched their grotesque and unaccountable gestures, I perceived clearly for the first time what it was that had offended me, what had given me the two inconsistent and conflicting impressions of utter strangeness and yet of the strangest familiarity. The three creatures engaged in this mysterious rite were human in shape, and yet human beings with the strangest air about them of some familiar animal. Each of these creatures, despite its human form, its rag of clothing, and the rough humanity of its bodily form, had woven into it, into its movements, into the expression of its countenance, into its whole presence, some now irresistible suggestion of a hog, a swinish taint, the unmistakable mark of the beast. I stood overcome by this amazing realization. And then the most horrible questionings came rushing into my mind. They began leaping in the air, first one, and then the other, whooping and grunting. Then one slipped, and for a moment was on all fours, to recover, indeed, forthwith. But that transitory gleam of the true animalism of these monsters was enough. I turned as noiselessly as possible, and becoming every now and then rigid with the fear of being discovered, as a branch cracked or a leaf rustled, I pushed back into the bushes. It was long before I grew bolder and dared to move freely. My only idea for the moment was to get away from these foul beings, and I scarcely noticed that I had emerged upon a faint pathway amidst the trees. Then suddenly traversing a little glade, I saw with an unpleasant start two clumsy legs among the trees, walking with noiseless footsteps parallel with my course, and perhaps 30 yards away from me. The head and upper part of the body were hidden by a tangle of creeper. I stopped abruptly, hoping the creature did not see me. The feet stopped as I did. So nervous was I that I controlled an impulse to headlong flight with the utmost difficulty. Then, looking hard, I distinguished through the interlacing network the head and body of the brute I had seen drinking. He moved his head. There was an emerald flash in his eyes as he glanced at me from the shadow of the trees, a half-luminous color that vanished as he turned his head again. He was motionless for a moment, and then, with a noiseless tread, began running through the green confusion. In another moment he had vanished behind some bushes. I could not see him, but I felt that he had stopped and was watching me again. What on earth was he? Man or beast? What did he want with me? I had no weapon, not even a stick. Flight would be madness. At any rate, the thing, whatever it was, lacked the courage to attack me. Setting my teeth hard, I walked straight towards him. I was anxious not to show the fear that seemed chilling my backbone. I pushed through a tangle of tall, white-flowered bushes and saw him 20 paces beyond, looking over his shoulder at me and hesitating. I advanced a step or two, looking steadfastly into his eyes. "Who are you?" said I. He tried to meet my gaze. "No," he said suddenly, and turning, went bounding away from me through the undergrowth. Then he turned and stared at me again. His eyes shone brightly out of the dusk under the trees. Like, I'm getting deer vibes from this one. My heart was in my mouth, but I felt my only chance was bluff and walked steadily towards him. He turned again and vanished into the dusk. Once more I thought I caught a glint of his eyes, and that was all. For the first time I realized how the lateness of the hour might affect me. The sun had set some minutes since, and the swift dusk of the tropics was already fading out of the eastern sky, and a pioneer moth fluttered silently by my head. Unless I would spend the night among the unknown dangers of the mysterious forest, I must hasten back to the enclosure. The thought of a return to that pain-haunted refuge was extremely disagreeable, but still more so was the idea of being overtaken in the open by darkness and all that darkness might conceal. I gave one more look into the blue shadows that had swallowed up this odd creature, and then retraced my way down the slope towards the stream, going as I judged in the direction from which I had come. I walked eagerly, my mind confused with many things, and presently found myself in a level place among scattered trees. The colorless clearness that comes after the sunset flush was darkling. That's a sentence. The blue sky above grew momentarily deeper, and the little stars, one by one, pierced the attenuated light. The interspaces of the trees, the gaps in the further vegetation that had been hazy blue in the daylight, grew black and mysterious. I pushed on. The color vanished from the world. The treetops rose against the luminous blue sky in inky silhouette, and all below that outline melted into one formless blackness. Presently the trees grew thinner, and the shrubbery undergrowth more abundant. Then there was a desolate space covered with a white sand, and then another expanse of tangled bushes. I did not remember crossing the sand opening before I began to be tormented by a faint rustling upon my right hand. I thought it was a fancy, for whenever I stopped, there was silence save for the evening breeze in the treetops. Then when I turned to hurry on again, there was an echo to my footsteps. I turned away from the thickets, keeping to the more open ground and endeavoring by sudden turns now and then to surprise something in the act of creeping upon me. I saw nothing, and nevertheless my sense of another presence grew steadily. I increased my pace, and after some time came to a slight ridge, crossed it, and turned sharply, regarding it steadfastly from the further side. It came out black and clear-cut against the darkling sky, and presently a shapeless lump heaved up momentarily against the skyline and vanished again. I felt assured now that my tawny-faced antagonist was stalking me once more. Coupled with that was another unpleasant realization that I had lost my way. For a time I hurried on, hopelessly perplexed, and pursued by that stealthy approach. Whatever it was, the thing either lacked the courage to attack me or was waiting to take me at some disadvantage. I kept studiously to the open. At times I would turn and listen, and presently I had half persuaded myself that my pursuer had abandoned the chase, or was a mere creation of my disordered imagination. Then I heard the sound of the sea. I quickened my footsteps almost into a run, and immediately there was a stumble in my rear. I turned suddenly and stared at the uncertain trees behind me. One black shadow seemed to leap into another. I listened, rigid, and heard nothing but the creep of the blood in my ears. I thought that my nerves were unstrung. and that my imagination was tricking me, and turned resolutely towards the sound of the sea again. In a minute or so the trees grew thinner, and I emerged upon a bare, low headland running out into the somber water. The night was calm and clear, and the reflection of the growing multitude of the stars shivered in the tranquil heaving of the sea. Some way out, the wash upon an irregular band of reef shone with a pallid light of its own. Westward I saw the zodiacal light mingling with the yellow brilliance of the evening star. The coast fell away from me to the east, and westward it was hidden by the shoulder of the cape. Then I recalled the fact that Moreau's beach lay to the west. A twig snapped behind me, and there was a rustle. I turned and stood facing the dark trees. I could see nothing, or else I could see too much. The dark form in the dimness had its ominous quality, its peculiar suggestion of alert watchfulness. So I stood for perhaps a minute, and then, with an eye to the trees still, turned westward to cross the headland. As I moved, one among the lurking shadows moved to follow me. My heart beat quickly. Presently the broad sweep of a bay to the westward became visible, and I halted again. The noiseless shadow halted a dozen yards from me. A little point of light shone on the further bend of the curve, and the gray sweep of the sandy beach lay faint under the starlight. Perhaps 2 miles away was that little point of light. To get to the beach, I should have to go through the trees where the shadows lurked, and down a bushy slope. I could see the thing rather more distinctly now. It was no animal, for it stood erect. At that I opened my mouth to speak, and found a hoarse phlegm choked my voice. I tried again and shouted, "Who is there?" There was no answer. I advanced a step. The thing did not move, only gathered itself together. My foot struck a stone. That gave me an idea. Without taking my eyes off the black form before me, I stooped and picked up this lump of rock, but at my motion, the thing turned abruptly as a dog might have done and slunk obliquely into the further darkness. Then I recalled a schoolboy expedient against big dogs, and twisted the rock into my handkerchief and gave this a turn round my wrist. I heard a movement further off among the shadows, as if the thing was in retreat. Then suddenly my tense excitement gave way. I broke into a profuse perspiration and fell a-trembling, with my adversary routed and this weapon in my hand. "Ooh, hello, Lily. Thank you for the hydrate." And the head pat. "I saw the results of your smash and pass. I hope you had a good time." And I hope you're the one taking me on the date, right? You're buying me dinner. That's how that goes. I assume that. No, would be nope. That's obviously how that works. What's your smash and pass? I have to buy you dinner? Damn it. I have to buy all the wives. That's not true. Sometimes they want to buy me dinner. We loves their wives. It was some time before I could summon resolution to go down through the trees and bushes upon the flank of the headland to the beach. At last I did it at a run, and as I emerged from the thicket upon the sand, I heard some other body come crashing after me. At that I completely lost my head with fear. I began running along the sand. Forthwith there came the swift patter of soft feet in pursuit. I gave a wild cry and redoubled my pace. Some dim black things about 3 or 4 times the size of rabbits went running or hopping up from the beach towards the bushes as I passed. If you want, you'll use your 1.59 for our dinner. Your 1.59? That's fine, Lily. I'll very happily take you out on a date. You can go somewhere nice. You're $1.59. Yeah. I know what, I'll even drive. It's fine. Actually, please let me drive. Absolutely, I have to be the one that drives. Okay, just no reason, or no. It's it's my male ego is my ego. My pride. I have my desire to stay alive. But it's no, it's fine, Lily. Please, I no, dear, you can't drive. No, you know what? I tell you, if you're the one taking me on a date, and you're paying for it, that's one thing. But if I'm the one taking you on a date, then it's only right that I should drive. Take a summer night, yeah, like the afterlife. Yeah, I'm not ready to go there out there. I mean, dear, I've seen what you do to sidewalks and pedestrians. I can't live with that. I don't let Valana drive. I don't do anything. No, your truck does. I don't let, Valana doesn't drive. It's also her choice, mind you. But yes, it's yes, but those are the rules. Whoever pays for dinner drives, and if it's not me, then I also drive. More serious, like long road trips, I do have to drive. If we're not flying, if we're going to drive somewhere, I don't mean like to dinner. I mean to like, for 5 hours to the next town kind of idea. I cannot be a passenger. I discovered that Valana and her parents would sometimes drive. We do 8-hour drives down to Vancouver, and I can't tolerate being a passenger in those long ass drives. If I'm driving, if I'm the driver, at least I think my brain, your brain's engaged, and you're doing something rather than passively watching the terrain go by. You love being the passenger princess. You can absolutely be my passenger princess. I insist on it. It's I can't do the passenger thing. Like 3 headbutts in a row. Thank you, dear. I absolutely have to be the driver. I'm just, Valana is the co-pilot. She feeds me the snacks and the drinks, and it's great. It works out really awesome. Really love smart cruise control too, actually. Just like so cool. 68% stinky. Oh, so close to the best level of stinky of all time. I do need a shower though. Yes, shower time. And then work tomorrow. Yay. Why bonk? That's there's the hammer. What, you work too? I sympathize. Why bonk though? You bonk me because you work? Again, congratulations on your employment, by the way. That's very exciting stuff. Very important stuff. Because, eating's important. It's mostly paperwork tomorrow. Yeah, that's the world we live in. Everything's got to be marked down somewhere. Often in multiple places and in triplicate. Mind you, the world we live in today is much less paper-oriented, depending on the field you're in, to be fair. And it's the university is getting away from paper very slowly, but we are getting away from paper. The leave forms and vacation forms and stuff are all online forms now, so I'm very happy about that. So as my manager, as the beginning of each year, I would hand in 12 forms. I kind of plan out my leave for the year, and I hand them in all at the same time. And they've got to double check everything and sign all the papers all at once. It's hilarious. So long as I live, I shall remember the terror of that chase. I ran near the water's edge and heard every now and then the splash of the feet that gained upon me. Far away, hopelessly far, was the yellow light. All the night about us was black and still. Splash, splash came the pursuing feet, nearer and nearer. I felt my breath going, for I was quite out of training. It whooped as I drew near it. It whooped as I drew it, and I felt a pain like a knife at my side. I perceived the thing would come up with me long before I reached the enclosure, and desperate and sobbing for my breath, I wheeled round upon it and struck at it as it came up to me, struck with all my strength. Thank you for the follow. The stone came out of the sling as the handkerchief, out of the sling of the handkerchief as I did so. As I turned, the thing which had been running on all fours rose to its feet, and the missile fell fair on its left temple. The skull rang out, and the animal man blundered into me, thrust me back with his hands, and went staggering past me to fall, headlong upon the sand with its face in the water. And there it lay still. A lucky strike, apparently. I could not bring myself to approach that black heap. I left it there, with the water rippling round it under the still stars, and giving it a wide berth, pursued by my way towards the yellow glow of the house, and presently, with a positive effect of relief, came the pitiful moaning of the puma, the sound that had originally driven me out to explore this mysterious island. At that, though I was faint and horribly fatigued, I gathered together all my strength and began running again towards the light. I thought I heard a voice calling me. This island is a fucking nightmare. There's just no good place to be, and it is all just a fucking nightmare. Chapter 10. The Crying of the Man. As I drew near the house, I saw the light shone from the open door of my room, and then I heard, coming from out of the darkness at the side of that orange oblong of light, the voice of Montgomery shouting, "Prendick!" I continued running. Presently I heard him again. I replied by a feeble "hello," and in another moment had staggered up to him. "Where have you been?" said he, holding me at arm's length so that the light from the door fell on my face. "We have both been so busy that we forgot you until about half an hour ago." He led me into the room and sat me down in the deck chair. For a while I was blinded by the light. "We did not think you would start to explore this island of ours without telling us," he said. And then, "I was afraid, but..." "What? Hello?" My last remaining strength slipped from me, and my head fell forward on my chest. I think he found a certain satisfaction in giving me brandy. "For God's sakes," said I, "fasten that door." "You have been meeting some of our curiosities, eh?" said he. He locked the door and turned to me again. He asked me no questions, but gave me some more brandy and water and pressed me to eat. I was in a state of collapse. He said something vague about his forgetting to warn me, and asked me briefly when I left the house and what I had seen. So we're starting our alcohol problem here, I guess. I answered him as briefly in fragmentary sentences. "Tell me what it all means," said I, in a state bordering on hysterics. "It's nothing so very dreadful," said he, "but I think you have had about enough for one day." The puma suddenly gave a sharp yell of pain. At that he swore under his breath. "I'm damned," said he, "if this place is not as bad as Gower Street with its cats." "Montgomery," said I, "what was that thing that came after me? Was it a beast, or was it a man?" "If you don't sleep tonight," he said, You'll be off your head tomorrow. I stood up in front of him. What was that thing that came after me? I asked. He looked me squarely in the eyes and twisted his mouth askew. His eyes, which had seemed animated a minute before, went dull. From your account, he said, I'm thinking it was a boggle. I felt a gust of intense irritation, which passed as quickly as it came. I flung myself into the chair again and pressed my hands on my forehead. The puma began once more. That thing has been in fucking pain this entire time. Just let it die, Jesus. Montgomery came round behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. Look here, Prendick, he said. I had no business to let you drift out into this silly island of ours, but it's not so bad as you feel, man. Your nerves are worked to rags. Let me give you something that will make you sleep. That will keep you on for hours yet. You must simply get to sleep, or I won't answer for it. I did not reply. I bowed forward and covered my face with my hands. Presently he returned with a small measure containing a dark liquid. This he gave me. I took it unresistingly, and he helped me into the hammock. It might have been poison, bro. When I awoke, it was broad day. For a little while I lay flat, staring at the roof above me. The rafters, I observed, were made out of the timbers of a ship. Then I turned my head and saw a meal prepared for me on the table. I perceived that I was hungry and prepared to clamber out of the hammock, which, very politely anticipating my intention, twisted round and deposited me upon all fours on the floor. A very handy hammock. Yes. I got up and sat down before the food. I had a heavy feeling in my head and only the vaguest memory at first of the things that had happened overnight. The morning breeze blew very pleasantly through the unglazed window, and that the food contributed to the sense of animal comfort which I experienced. Presently the door behind me, the door inward towards the yard of the enclosure, opened. I turned and saw Montgomery's face. "All right," said he. "I am frightfully busy," and he shut the door. Afterwards I discovered that he forgot to relock it. Then I recalled the expression of his face the previous night, and with the memory of all I had experienced reconstructed itself before me. Even as that fear came back to me, a cry from within. But this time it was not the cry of a puma. I put down the mouthful that hesitated upon my lips and listened. Silence, save for the whisper of the morning breeze. I began to think my ears had deceived me. After a long pause, I resumed my meal, but with my ears still vigilant. Presently, I heard something else, very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all I had hitherto heard of the abominations behind the wall. There was no mistake this time in the quality of the dim, broken sounds. No doubt at all of their source, for it was groaning, broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time. It was a human being in torment. Oh my god. This is reminding me of Fullmetal Alchemist. Eric, brother. Poor girl. As I realized this, I rose, and in 3 steps I crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard, and flung it open before me. "Prendick, man, stop!" cried Montgomery, intervening. A startled deerhound yelped and snarled. There was blood, I saw, in the sink, brown and some scarlet, and I smelt a peculiar smell of carbolic acid. Then, through an open doorway beyond, in the dim light of the shadow, I saw something bound painfully upon a framework, scarred, red, and bandaged, and then blotting this out appeared the face of old Moreau, white and terrible. In a moment, he had gripped me by the shoulder with a hand that was smeared red, had twisted me off my feet, and flung me headlong back into my own room. He lifted me as though I was a little child. I fell at full length upon the floor, and the door slammed shut out of the passionate intensity of his face. Then I heard the key turn in the lock, and Montgomery's voice in expostulation. "Ruined the work of a lifetime," I heard Moreau say. "He does not understand," said Montgomery, and other things that were inaudible. "I can't spare the time yet," said Moreau. The rest I did not hear. I picked myself up and stood, trembling, my mind a chaos of the most horrible misgivings. Could it be possible, I thought, that such a thing as the vivisection of men was carried on here? The question shot like lightning across a tumultuous sky, and suddenly the clouded horror of my mind condensed into a vivid realization of my own danger. Chapter 11, The Hunting of the Man. It came before my mind with an unreasonable hope of escape that the outer door of my room was still open to me. I was convinced now, absolutely assured, that Moreau had been vivisecting a human being. All the time since I had heard his name, I had been trying to link in my mind in some way the grotesque animalism of the islanders with his abominations, and now I thought I saw it all. The memory of his work on the transfusion of blood recurred to me. These creatures I had seen were the victims of some hideous experiment. These sickening scoundrels had merely intended to keep me back, to fool me with their display of confidence, and presently to fall upon me with a fate more horrible than death, with torture. And after torture, the most hideous degradation it is possible to conceive, to send me off a lost soul, a beast, to the rest of their common route. I looked round for some weapon. Nothing. Then, with an inspiration, I turned over the deck chair, put my foot on the side of it, and tore away the side rail. It happened that a nail came away with the wood, and projecting, gave a touch of danger to an otherwise petty weapon. I heard a step outside, and incontinently flung open the door and found Montgomery within a yard of it. He bent to lock the outer door. I raised this nailed stick of mine and cut at his face, but he sprang back. I hesitated a moment, then turned and fled round the corner of the house. "Prendick, man!" I heard his astonished cry. "Don't be a silly ass, man!" Another minute, thought I, and he would have locked me in, and as ready as a hospital rabbit for my fate. He emerged behind the corner, for I heard him shout, "Prendick!" and he began to run after me, shouting things as he ran. This time, running blindly, I went northeastward in a direction at right angles to my previous expedition. Once, as I went running headlong up the beach, I glanced over my shoulder and saw his attendant with him. I ran furiously up the slope, over it, then turning eastward along the rocky valley fringed on either side with jungle, I ran for perhaps a mile altogether, my chest straining, my heart beating in my ears, and then hearing nothing of Montgomery or his man, and feeling upon the verge of exhaustion, I doubled sharply back towards the beach, as I judged, and lay down in the shelter of a canebrake. There I remained for a long time, too fearful to move, and indeed too fearful even to plan a course of action. The wild scene about me lay sleeping silently under the sun, and the only sound near me was the thin hum of some small gnats that had discovered me. Presently, I became aware of a drowsy breathing sound, the soughing of the sea upon the beach. After about an hour, I heard Montgomery shouting my name, far away to the north. That set me thinking of my plan of action. As I interpreted then, this island was inhabited only by these two vivisectors and their animalized victims. Some of these, no doubt, they could press into their service against me if need arose. I knew both Moreau and Montgomery carried revolvers, and, save for a feeble bar of deal spiked with a small nail, the merest mockery of a mace, I was unarmed. So I still lay there, until I began to think of food and drink. And at that thought, the real hopelessness of my position came home to me. I knew no way of getting anything to eat. I was too ignorant of botany to discover any resort of root or fruit that might lie about me. I had no means of trapping the few rabbits upon the island. It grew blanker the more I turned the prospect over. At last, in the desperation of my position, my mind turned to the animal men I had encountered. I tried to find some hope in what I remembered of them. In turn, I recalled each one I had seen and tried to draw some augury of assistance from my memory. Then suddenly, I heard a stag-hound bay, and that realized a new danger. I took little time to think, or they would have caught me then, but snatching up my nailed stick, rushed headlong from my hiding place towards the sound of the sea. I remember a growth of thorny plants with spines that stabbed like penknives. I emerged bleeding and with torn clothes upon the lip of a long creek opening northward. That's not going to help you with your trying to escape the tracking bro. I went straight into the water without a minute's hesitation, wading up the creek and presently finding myself knee-deep in a little stream. I scrambled out at last on the westward bank, and with my heart beating loudly in my ears, crept into a single tangle of ferns to await the issue. I heard the dog, there was only one, draw near and yelp when it came to the thorns. Then I heard no more, and presently began to think I had escaped. The minutes passed. The silence lengthened out, and at last, after an hour of security, my courage began to return to me. By this time, I was no longer very much terrified or miserable. I had, as it were, passed the limit of terror and despair. I felt now that my life was practically lost, and that persuasion made me capable of daring anything. I had even a certain wish to encounter Moreau face to face, and as I had waded into the water, I remembered that if I were too hard-pressed, at least one path of escape from torment still lay open to me. They could not very well prevent my drowning myself. I had half a mind to drown myself then, but an odd wish to see the whole adventure out, a queer, impersonal, spectacular interest in myself restrained me. What are these? Wayward Bard, thanks for your first comment. Lurkin and reading books. Good stuff. Welcome to my channel. I stretched my limbs, sore and painful from the pricks of the spiny plants, and stared around me at the trees. And, so suddenly that it seemed to jump out of the green tracery about it, my eyes lit upon a black face watching me. I saw that it was a simian creature who had met the launch upon the beach. He was clinging to the oblique stem of a palm tree. I gripped my stick and stood up facing him. He began chattering. You, was all I could distinguish at first. Suddenly he dropped from the tree, and in another moment was holding the fronds apart and staring curiously at me. I did not feel the same repugnance towards this creature which I had experienced in my encounters with the other beastmen. You, he said, in the boat. He was a man then. At least as much of a man as Montgomery's attendant, for he could talk. Yes, I said. I came in the boat from the ship. Oh, he said. His bright, restless eyes traveled over me to my hands, to the stick I carried, to my feet, to the tattered places in my coat, and the cuts and scratches I had received from the thorns. He seemed puzzled at something. His eyes came back to my hands. He held his own hand out and counted his digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did not grasp his meaning then. Afterwards, I was to find that a great proportion of these beast people had malformed hands, lacking sometimes even 3 digits, but guessing this was in some way a greeting, I did the same thing by way of reply. He grinned with immense satisfaction. Then his swift, roving glance went round again. He made a swift movement and vanished. The fern fronds he had stood behind came swishing together. I pushed out of the brake after him and was astonished to find him swinging cheerfully by one lank arm from a rope of creepers that looped down from the foliage overhead. His back was to me. "Hello?" said I. He came down with a twisting jump and stood facing me. "I say," said I, "where can I get something to eat?" "Eat," he said. "Eat man's food now." His eye went back to the swinging of ropes. "At the huts." "But where are the huts?" "Oh, I'm new, you know." At that he swung round and set off at a quick walk. All his motions were curiously rapid. "Come along," said he. Running out of water. I went with him to see the adventure out. I guessed the huts were some rough shelter where he and some of these beast people lived. I might perhaps find them friendly, find some handle in their minds to take hold of. I did not know how far they had forgotten their human heritage. My ape-like companion trotted along by my side with his hands hanging down and his jaw thrust forward. I wondered what memory he might have in him. "How long have you been on this island?" said I. "How long?" he asked. And after having the question repeated, he held up 3 fingers. The creature was little better than an idiot. I tried to make out what he meant by that, and it seems I bored him. After another question or two, he suddenly left my side and went leaping at some fruit that hung from a tree. He pulled down a handful of prickly husks and went on eating the contents. I noted this with satisfaction, for here at least was a hint for feeding. I tried him with some other questions, but his chattering, prompt responses were as often not quite at cross purposes with my question. Some few were appropriate, others quite parrot-like. Oh, we have an ad coming in. All right, we're going to take a little break. I might go grab a little more water, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. And we're back. Okay. Let's pick up where we left off. I can find the correct tab. Right. He was trying to ask his new friend questions, but answers are unfocused, it seems. I was so intent upon these peculiarities that I scarcely noticed the path we followed. Presently we came to trees, all charred and brown, so as to a bare place covered with a yellow-white incrustation, across which a drifting smoke, pungent in whiffs to nose and eyes, went drifting. On our right, over a shoulder of bare rock, over a shoulder of bare rock, I saw the level blue of the sea. The path coiled down abruptly into a narrow ravine between 2 tumbled and knotty masses of blackish scoriae. Into this we plunged. It was extremely dark. This passage, after the blinding sunlight reflected from the sulphurous ground, its walls grew steep and approached each other. Blotches of green and crimson drifted across my eyes. My conductor stopped suddenly. "Home," said he, and I stood in the floor of a chasm that was at first absolutely dark to me. I heard some strange noises and thrust the knuckles of my left hand in my eyes. I became aware of a disagreeable odor, like that of a monkey's cage ill-cleaned. Beyond, the rock opened again upon a gradual slope of sunlit greenery, and on either hand the light smote down through narrow ways into the central gloom. Chapter 12. The Sayers of the Law. This book has I think 22 chapters, so we'll probably end after this chapter, just to split the book in half, I think. Yeah. Anyways, the Slayers of the Law. Then something cold touched my hand. I started violently and saw close to me a dim pinkish thing, looking more like a flayed child than anything else in the world. The creature had exactly the mild but repulsive features of a sloth, the same low forehead and slow gestures. I don't want to know how you know what a flayed child looks like. Yes. As the first shock of the change of light passed, I saw about me more distinctly. The little sloth-like creature was standing and staring at me. My conductor had vanished. The place was a narrow passage between high walls of lava, a crack in the knotted rock, and on either side interwoven heaps of sea mat, palm fans, and reeds leaning against the rock formed rough and impenetrably dark dens. The winding way up the ravine between these was scarcely 3 yards wide, and was disfigured by lumps of decaying fruit pulp and other refuse, which accounted for the disagreeable stench of the place. The little pink sloth creature was still blinking at me when my ape-man reappeared at the aperture of the nearest of these dens and beckoned me in. As he did so, a slouching monster wriggled out of one of the places farther up this strange street, and stood up in featureless silhouette against the bright green beyond, staring at me. I hesitated, having half a mind to bolt the way I had come, and then, determined to go through with the adventure, I gripped my nailed stick about the middle and crawled into the little evil-smelling lean-to after my conductor. It was a semicircular space, shaped like the half of a beehive, and against the rocky wall that formed the inner side of it was a pile of variegated fruits. Variegated. Yes. Coconuts, among others. Some rough vessels of lava and wood stood about the floor, and one on a rough stool. There was no fire. In the darkest corner of the hut sat a shapeless mass of darkness that grunted, "Hey," as I came in. And the ape-man stood in the dim light of the doorway and held out a split coconut to me as I crawled into the other corner and squatted down. I took it and began gnawing it as serenely as possible. In spite of a certain trepidation and the nearly intolerable closeness of the den, the little pink sloth creature stood in the aperture of the hut, and something else within a drab face and bright eyes came staring over its shoulder. Can you eat coconut just like that? I thought it was toxic before you prepared it for some reason. "Hey," came out of the lump of mystery opposite. "It is a man. It is a man," gabbled my conductor. A man, a 5-man like me. "You can't eat raw. No, that's not coconut. That's cocoa. That's cocoa, right? That's not coconut. It says cocoa nuts, not cocoa nuts. So that implies chocolate, right? That's the chocolate cocoa. Sorry if that wasn't made clear in my mutterings. A man. Yeah, no, you can't. You can eat those too? Okay. I wonder why I thought it was toxic. A man, a 5-man like me. Shut up, said the voice from the dark and grunted. I gnawed my cocoa nut amid an impressive stillness. I peered hard into the blackness but could distinguish nothing. It is a man, the voice repeated. He comes here to live with us. It was a thick voice, with something in it, a kind of whistling overtone, that struck me as peculiar, but the English accent was strangely good. The 8-man looked at me as though he expected something. I perceived the pause was interrogative. He comes to live with you, I said. It is a man. He must learn the law. I began to distinguish now a deeper blackness in the black, a vague outline of a hunched-up figure. Then I noticed the opening of the place was darkened by 2 more black heads. My hand tightened on my stick. The thing in the dark repeated in a louder tone, "Say the words." I had missed the last remark. Not to go on all fours. That is the law. It repeated in a kind of a sing-song. I was puzzled. Say the words, said the 8-man, repeating, and the figures in the doorway echoed this with a threat in the tone of their voices. I realized that I had to repeat this idiotic formula, and then began the insanest ceremony. The voice in the dark began intoning a mad litany, line by line, and I and the rest to repeat it. As they did so, they swayed from side to side in the oddest way, and beat their hands upon their knees, and I followed their example. I could have imagined I was already dead and in another world. That dark hut, these grotesque dim figures, just flecked here and there by a glimmer of light, and all of them swaying in unison and chanting. Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to suck up drink, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat fish or flesh, that is the law. Are we not, why not fish? Are we not men? Not to claw the bark of trees, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to chase other men, that is the law. Are we not men? And so from this prohibition of these acts of folly on to the prohibition of what I thought then were the maddest, most impossible, and most indecent things one could well imagine. A kind of rhythmic fervor fell on all of us. We gabbled and swayed faster and faster, repeating this amazing law. Superficially, the contagion of these brutes was upon me, but deep down within me the laughter and disgust struggled together. We ran through a long list of prohibitions, and then the chant swung round to a new formula. His is the house of pain. His is the hand that makes. His is the hand that wounds. And his is the hand that heals. And so on for another long series, mostly quite incomprehensible gibberish to me about him, whoever he might be. I could have fancied it was a dream, but never before have I heard chanting in a dream. His is the lightning flash, we sang. His is the deep salt sea. A horrible fancy came into my head that Moreau, after animalizing these men, had infected their dwarfed brains with a kind of deification of himself. However, I was too keenly aware of white teeth and strong claws about me to stop my chanting on that account. His are the stars in the sky. At last that song ended. I saw the 8-man's face shining with perspiration, and my eyes being now accustomed to the darkness, I saw more distinctly the figure in the corner from which the voice came. It was the size of a man, but it seemed covered with a dull gray hair, almost like a sky terrier. What was it? What were they all? Imagine yourself surrounded by all the most horrible cripples and maniacs it is possible to conceive, and you may understand a little of my feelings with these grotesque caricatures of humanity about me. He is a five-man. A five-man like me, said the ape-man. I held out my hands. The gray creature in the corner leant forward. Not to run on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? He said. He put out a strangely distorted talon and gripped my fingers. The thing was almost like the hoof of a deer produced into claws. I could have yelled with surprise and pain. His face came forward and peered at my nails, came forward into the light of the opening of the hut, and I saw with a quivering disgust that he was like the face of neither man nor beast, but a mere shock of gray hair with three shadowy overarchings to mark the eyes and mouth. He has little nails, said this grisly creature in his hairy beard. It is well. He threw my hand down, and instinctively I gripped my stick. Ear roots and herbs, it is his will, said the ape-man. I am the sayer of the law, said the gray figure. Here come all that be new to learn the law. I sit in the darkness and say the law. It is even so, said one of the beasts in the doorway. Evil are the punishments of those who break the law. None escape. None escape, said the beast folk, glancing furtively to one another. None, said the ape-man. None escape, see? I did a little thing, a wrong thing once. I jabbered, stopped talking. None could understand. I am burnt, branded in the hand. He is great, he is good. None escape, said the great creature in the corner. None escape, said the beast people, looking askance at one another. For every one the want that is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. What you will want, we do not know. We shall not know. Some want to follow things that move, to watch and slink and wait and spring, to kill and bite deep and rich, sucking the blood. It is bad. Not to chase other men, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat flesh or fish, that is the law. Are we not men? None escape, said a dappled brute standing in the doorway. For every one the want is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. Some want to go tearing with teeth and hands into the roots of things, snuffing into the earth. It is bad. None escape, said the man in the door. Some go clawing trees. Some go scratching at the graves of the dead. Some go fighting with foreheads or feet or claws. Some bite suddenly, none giving occasion. Some love uncleanness. None escape, said the ape-man, scratching his calf. None escape, said the little pink sloth creature. And I just sent my mouse scurrying across the damn... Okay, come on. It's a very dramatic scene. Punishment is sharp and sure. Therefore, learn the law, say the words. And incontinently, he began again the strange litany of the law. And again I and those creatures began singing and swaying. My head reeled with his jabbering and the close stench of the place, but I kept on, trusting to find presently some chance of a new development. Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? We were making such a noise that I noticed nothing of a tumult outside, until someone, who I think was one of the two swine men I had seen, thrust his head over the little pink sloth creature and shouted something excitedly, something that I did not catch. Incontinently, those at the opening of the hut vanished. My ape-man rushed out. The thing that had sat in the dark followed him. I only observed that it was big and clumsy and covered with silvery hair, and I was left alone. Then, before I reached the aperture, I heard the yelp of a staghound. In another moment, I was standing outside the hovel, my chair rail in my hand, every muscle of me quivering. Before me were the clumsy backs of perhaps a score of these beast people, their misshapen heads half hidden by their shoulder blades. They were gesticulating excitedly. Other half-animal faces glared interrogation out of the hovels, looking in the direction of which they faced. I saw coming through the haze, under the trees beyond the end of the passage of dens, the dark figure and awful white face of Moreau. He was holding the leaping staghound back, and close behind him came Montgomery, revolver in hand. For a moment I stood, horror-struck. I turned and saw the passage behind me blocked by another heavy brute with a huge gray face and twinkling little eyes, advancing towards me. I looked round and saw to the right of me and a half-dozen yards in front of me a narrow gap in the wall of rock, through which a ray of light slanted into the shadows. "Stop!" cried Moreau as I strode towards this, and then, "Hold him!" At that, first one face turned towards me, and then others. Their bestial minds were happily slow. I dashed my shoulder into a clumsy monster who was turning to see what Moreau meant, and flung him forward into another. I felt his hands fly round, clutching at me and missing me. The little pink sloth creature dashed at me, and I gashed down its ugly face with the nail in my stick, and in another minute was scrambling up a steep side pathway, a kind of sloping chimney out of the ravine. I heard a howl behind me, and cries of, "Catch him! Hold him!" And the gray-faced creature appeared behind me and jammed his huge bulk into the cleft. "Go on! Go on!" they howled. I clambered up the narrow cleft in the rock and came out upon the sulphur of the westward side of the village of the beastmen. The gap was altogether fortunate for me, for the narrow chimney slanting obliquely upward must have impeded the near pursuers. I ran over the white space and down a steep slope, through a scattered growth of trees, and came to a low-lying stretch of tall reeds, through which I pushed into a dark, thick undergrowth that was black and succulent underfoot. As I plunged into the reeds, my foremost pursuers emerged from the gap. I broke my way through this undergrowth for some minutes. The air behind me and about me was soon full of threatening cries. I heard the tumult of my pursuers in the gap up the slope, then the crashing of the reeds, and every now and then the crackling crash of a branch. Some of the creatures roared like excited beasts of prey. The staghound yelped to the left, and I heard Moreau and Montgomery shouting in the same direction. I turned sharply to the right. It seemed to me, even then, that I heard Montgomery shouting for me to run for my life. Interesting thing to shout at him. Very interesting. Why are you... Oh, okay. OBS wanted to refresh my activity feed for some crazy reason. Craziness. Presently the ground gave rich and oozy under my feet, but I was desperate and went headlong into it, struggling through knee-deep, and so came to a winding path among tall canes. The noise of my pursuers passed away to my left. In one place, 3 strange pink hopping animals about the size of cats bolted before my footsteps. This pathway ran uphill, across another open space covered with white incrustation, and plunged into a cane brake again. Then suddenly it turned parallel with the edge of a steep-walled gap which came without warning, like the ha-ha of an English park, turned with an unexpected abruptness. I was still running with all my might, and I never saw this drop until I was flying headlong through the air. I fell on my forearms and head, among thorns, and rose with a torn ear and bleeding face. I had fallen into a precipitous ravine, rocky and thorny. full of a hazy mist which drifted about me in wisps, and with a narrow streamlet from which this mist came meandering down the center. I was astonished at this thin fog in the full blaze of daylight, but I had no time to stand wondering then. I turned to my right, downstream, hoping to come to the sea in that direction, and so have my way open to drown myself. It was only later I found that I had dropped my nailed stick in my fall. Presently, the ravine grew narrower for a space, and I carelessly stepped into the stream. I jumped out again pretty quickly, for the water was almost boiling. I noticed, too, there was a thin, sulphurous scum dripping upon its coiling water. Almost immediately came a turn in the ravine, and the indistinct blue horizon. The near sea was flashing the sun from a myriad of facets. I saw my death before me, but I was hot and panting. With the warm blood oozing out on my face and running pleasantly through my veins, I felt more than a touch of exultation, too, at having distanced my pursuers. It was not in me then to go out and drown myself yet. I stared back the way I had come. I listened. Save for the hum of gnats and the chirp of some small insects that hopped among the thorns, the air was absolutely still. Then came the yelp of a dog, very faint, and a chattering and gibbering, the snap of a whip and voices. They grew louder and then fainter again. The noise receded up the stream and faded away. For a while the chase was over, but I knew now how much hope of help for me lay in the beast people. I mean, you got a meal, I guess. It is a little early, but that is the end of chapter 12, and my voice is feeling a little sore. And I do need a shower. And it's not just because Gwen in chat says so. So I think we're going to wrap up here and read on out.